now. So, okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Greetings from New Orleans and the illustrious Dillard University. My name is Zella Palmer, Director and Chair of the Dillard University Ray Charles Program in African American Material Culture. Today, Chef Therese Nelson, founder of Black Culinary History, and I will be in conversation. Chef Therese Nelson is a chef with over 20 years of culinary training and experience, focusing her work mainly in the catering and private chef world. She uses her culinary experiences to write about Black identity in the culinary world and has contributed her work to publications including First We Feast, Taste, Southern Living, and All Recipes. In addition to writing and cooking, Therese is the founder of BlackCulinaryHistory.com, a social network and digital archive centered around preserving Black history, connecting Black chefs, and providing a starting point for young Black culinary professionals to start. So thank you all for joining us tonight. We would like to give a special thanks to Dillard University President, Dr. Walter Kimbrough, Vice President of Academic Affairs, Dr. Yolanda Page. And we would also like to encourage our listeners to learn more about the Dillard University Ray Charles program and our food studies minor. After our conversation, which I've already actually done, I provided a link so you can learn more about our program and our food studies minor for interested students. Also some links to our Legacies of American Slavery short film series produced by our students, Levante Lucas and Sharice Campbell. We will hopefully have enough time to open the floor for questions and answers. So please add your questions to the Q&A box. Thank you, Therese, for doing this.
No problem. So if you all have been following this series, you know that Zella is typically the person who is interviewing her illustrious experts. And this time we are turning the tables and she's given me the amazing opportunity and honor to get her insights and to interview her. So I'm going to have some housekeeping notes because we want to start this program off right. We are convened here today for the Legacies of American Slavery, a multi-year project initiative of the Council of Independent Colleges in cooperation with the Gilder Lehrman Center for the Study of Slavery and Resistance, and Abolition at the MacMillan Center at Yale University. This project is also supported by a generous grant from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation with supplemental funding from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Dillard University was selected as one of the regional collaboration partners that will focus on the fundamental theme of cultural creativity, defined as the cultural expression in all its forms as a way of understanding and coping with American slavery and its aftermath. Through the cultural creativity theme, Dillard will explore the following sub-themes: food, music, and tourism, which you've gotten so many amazing conversations already. And tonight's conversation will focus on food. I am honored to introduce my dear friend, Professor Zella Palmer. Zella is an author, professor, filmmaker, curator, and scholar. She's also the chair and director of the Dillard University's Ray Charles Program in African American Material Culture. Zella is a committed scholar and documentarian. Her work centers on documenting and preserving the legacies of African American, Latinx, Creole, and Indigenous culinary history. As a chair of Dillard University Ray Charles Program, Zella has filmed and produced the story of New Orleans Creole cooking, the Black Hands in the Pot documentary, and the Legacies of American Slavery, food, music, and tourism film series, which you can check out some of, little taste of on YouTube, but it's definitely going to be forthcoming a lot more on that front. In 2014, Palmer launched the Dr. Rudy Joseph Lombard Black Hands in the Pot lecture series that invited guest speakers such as Dr. Howard Conyers, a NASA rocket scientist, barbecue pit master from South Carolina, and Kingsford Charcoal Preserve the Pit ambassador. In 2020, under Palmer's leadership, Dillard University launched a food studies minor, one of only 2 accredited food studies programs at an HBCU currently running. In the fall of 2016, Palmer and her students filmed and produced, like I mentioned before, the documentary, The Story of New Orleans Creole Cooking, the Black Hands in the Pot, about the history and contributions of the world-famous New Orleans Creole cuisine. She's also an author of 3 books and many articles, too numerous to list here. Her latest publication, Recipes and Remembrances of Fair Dillard, 1869 to 2019, shares archival recipes and stories from Dillard University. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Previously, she was a guest speaker for NYU's Food Studies, Nichols State University, Maryville University, among many other opportunities she's had to share her scholarship. Zella serves on the board of the Herman Greenman and Gallia Historic Houses, which we'll also talk about, the James Beard Foundation's Black and Indigenous Fund Committee, and is a judge for this year's Restaurant and Chef Awards. Yeah, I think we'll finish up by the fact that Zella is published in many, her expertise is published in many places, including Louisiana's Endowment for the Humanities, Cultural Vistas, 64 Parishes, Essence Magazine, and For the Culture. And in 2019, something we definitely have to talk about, Zella's work around Nellie Murray was highlighted at La Cucina in San Francisco. Nellie Murray, who we again will get into, was the most sought after caterer in 19th century New Orleans. She was sort of the Leah Chase of her era. And finally, Zella in 2018 received the Culture Bearers Award from the Mardi Gras Indians Hall of Fame. And in 2020 was New Orleans Magazine's, one of New Orleans Magazine's People to Watch. So you all are in for delightful and insightful insights from this amazing scholar.
Thank you, Therese. Thank you for doing this. I'm usually behind the scenes, so I'm comfortable with you, and we have sat on many panels, and I just really admire your work. You have been, such a resource, and just an incredible activist, advocate for so many Black chefs across this country, and your voice is so appreciated. And I just want to lift you up for all that you do.
Well, I appreciate that, but tonight is about you and your brilliant mind and letting the people watch you work. I am so thankful to be able to sit and have your insights, because I think that people, maybe see your work because it's you said, you're in your words, behind the scenes. Your work is so about telling other folks' stories and being in service of history. And so I think sometimes our personal stories don't necessarily serve telling those stories, right? Like you're telling other, your work around Nellie Murray in particular, your work documenting Leah Chase's work. Those stories, while passionate and central to your spirit, don't necessarily talk about you and your own personal history. I think so much of that informs the intention with which you do your work. And so I would love for you to just talk a little bit about who Zella Palmer is, where you come from, because I think so much of your sort of familiar history and HBCUs, also your family's legacy in food and food service, make you perfectly positioned for your role at Dillard.
Thank you. Where do I start? So I was born and raised in Chicago. As so much I could say, about my parents. I come from a legacy of just incredible activists, scholars. My mother was the dean of English at Northwestern University, and she ran the Black House, which was the space for African-American students back in the 70s. And she eventually became a senator. And my dad, he had died in April, but he was just an international scholar, global activist. But I really got into this work just from them taking me to museums and, and just reading all of the art books that they would have on the table in our house. We would call it the Palmer House South. And we had so many people from all over the world just literally just sitting at the table and talking to us. But my mother was really passionate about telling our legacy on her side of the family, specifically her grandfather, Dr. Joseph Ward, who was the first hospital administrator, executive director to run a Black veterans hospital right after World War One. And he actually served in World War One, but he was also Madam C.J. Walker's personal physician. And he was born in Wilson, North Carolina. He came from, you know, he was an unwanted child, it's a long story, but, his father was a landowner. He owned 435 acres, Napoleon Hagan. My cousin has done a lot of research on this. And his mother was formerly enslaved by one of, and was the offspring of one of the wealthiest slave owners in Wilson, Dr. David Ward. And so she always would tell us these stories. My grandmother would sit there, and it was important for them to keep telling these stories for each generation, because if we didn't, a lot of times, we get written out of these stories, or, somebody else writes the book but doesn't really lift it up. But I'm grateful to Lelia Bundles, who was, Madam C.J. Walker's great granddaughter. She wrote extensively about my great grandfather. So that, just having that living document, and just showing, and who I was named after. I was named after Dr. Joseph Ward's lovely wife, Zella Locklear. And so my mother was, it was a historian. She went all, she pinpointed this. And then I have a cousin who's a lawyer in Atlanta who has this blog, and, she did all the research on our family, So the North Carolina side runs deep. And then my dad, on his side, we, before I was telling you previously, before I started at Dillard, my sisters went to Xavier. I would come down in New Orleans, but it didn't really click until my uncle sat me down and said, it's a reason why you're in food, and I was going to choose between going to culinary school or pursuing a master's degree in museum studies. And I was more interested in the storytelling through food. And what I'm doing hadn't even been created yet. We had Dr. Jessica Harris, and I would read her profusely, when I was a graduate student, and I didn't know what was out there, and if it was even possible to merge my love for history, my love for archival research and food together. But clearly, there's a career and an industry for that, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
yeah, and so when my uncle, before he died, I didn't know he had cancer, and his stepdaughter is also, she finds people, and she finds your people, basically. I can't remember the name of her company, but she's out of Belgium. She lives in Brussels, and she helps locate your family genealogy. And so it was all there, the New Orleans side, we always knew that, but to see the actual names, to see that everyone was listed as cooks in the New Orleans census. And then, Edward Palmer, the first, who was, my father was named after, was a cook and moved to Chicago during the Great Migration and was working as a cook in a hotel. So, and Alice Palmer, my great grandmother, I was having this conversation with Dr. Erin Greenwald, who was part of our Legacies of Film series. And she has done extensive research, and she's also an incredible curator. And now she's the executive director of Louisiana Endowment for Humanities, as well as the editor for 64 Parishes. And just standing there with her, where enslaved people were probably walked, who came during the domestic slave trade, it was very emotional for me. It was very real, because Alice Palmer, who ironically my mother's name is Alice Palmer, but Palmer by marriage, but she was sold during the domestic slave trade when she was 14 years old from Virginia. And I asked, Dr. Ibrahim Sack, who was also one of our
Yes.
guests, was she shipped? Was she walked? And he said most likely she was walked because it was more affordable. You make more money that way. And I just can't imagine being 14 years old, walked from Virginia to New Orleans. And so doing the work that I do is very personal for me, because I am able to get in the archives. I'm able to, research and teach and cook and give voice to my own family that never were able to have these conversations. So it's so nuanced. And I was in North Carolina. I'm working on a book right now, and just standing in front of the house and being able to go inside the house where my North Carolina enslaved ancestor lived was wild. you know.
Mhm.
It made the hairs on my skin stand up. And I wish I would have, the house was for sale and I wish I would have bought it back then. But it's personal.
Mm. I mean, I think thank you for that. And I don't want to spend too much time here because I know we have a lot of area to cover, but I thought it was important to really ground us there because I think this is personal work for you. And I think those elements really do sort of inform the ways in which your scholarship kind of, that you ask better questions because it is personal.
Mhm.
I would love if we could maybe start with archive. HBCUs are wildly untapped and under-resourced sources of archive. One of the reasons New Orleans is such a particularly vital place to look for history is because of the meticulous record keeping and the fact that archives were so preserved there. There are lots of reasons. Dr. Seck in his work during his lecture, enumerated some of the ways in which, or the reasons why that would be so. But I would like to talk a little bit about why we should be more in community with HBCUs as
Mm,
archive.
mm,
But then also thinking a lot about New Orleans in particular, and the way as a historian, you are a detective, right? So
right.
the ways in which New Orleans becomes a really important place for researchers and archivists.
Sure. So, well, I can, start with John Blassingame. He was one of the first, African Americans to actually get in the archives. He had to get permission, and this was back, in the 70s and 80s. And he wrote an incredible book about Black New Orleans, specifically during post-Reconstruction. And he had to get permission to go into those archives. And so we weren't allowed in those spaces, right? And so this is something very recent. And, so HBCUs, like, and just here, even just in Louisiana, are critical to understanding our history. And, we need to donate to our local HBCUs, especially in places where, you know, slavery happened, where so much happened, and in Louisiana in particular. When I look at I'm so grateful to our archivists at Dillard, our librarians, Malik Bartholomew. If you ever in New Orleans, please, book a tour. He also does tours, NOLA tours, .com. Then also John Kennedy, and he graduated from the museum study that is a Dillard alum as well, and went to SUNY. And they were the ones who were really passionate and invited me into the archives. And we were able also to partner with Smithsonian, and they reached out to us, and we have this great project coming where we're going to be able to digitize, people in the community, whatever photographs they have, videos, etc. So we have a lot of, works in progress. And, Amistad Research Center, one of the largest repositories for African American history, that started at Dillard University, right? And so, when we look at HBCUs that closed down, or, who archives are not in the best conditions, or not, the humidifier isn't right, or, all of those things are very, very important, because what happens is, all of that can be molded, so many environmental things can happen, especially in particular places like Louisiana, where we are constantly under threat from natural disasters. So it's so important to invest in your HBCU and support the work that we do, because this is critical to telling our stories, and not just that, but the, notarial archives. We have, so many, I mean, the Catholic Church, the during the French and the Spanish colonial period, and juxtaposed against Anglo-American kind of Protestant, after they purchased the Louisiana Purchase, the Catholics were, incessant about writing everything down, so the French and Spanish wrote everything down, and when you look at some of those runaway slave ads, or, the auction, I mean, they were detailed. I mean, this was during a time when there was an, social security number. So you had to describe that runaway enslaved person, a maroon, to a T. Right? They had to find you, you were property, and they needed to recover their money. Right? So they needed to describe if you had a tribal mark, if you spoke a different language, where you came from, all of those are listed, and clear, and it also shows in Louisiana just how vast and how many people from different countries were here. It says Nago, which means, you were from the Yoruba tribe. It says Igbo. It says, if you were from Wolof. It says if you were from Cuba, if you were Creole, if you were Griff. All of these classifications were plain as day on these, runaway notices and sale auctions, the fancy girls, as and we still have some of these postcards, and Dr. Aaron Greenwald talks about that in one of and when we filmed her, and talks about the legacies of the praline vendors, and how some of these major praline companies today at one time would put, quote unquote, the tanties, what we call the tainties in Creole, and now we call auntie, right? Or the mammies for the rest of the US, right? They would put, mannequins of that in front of their storefront. So all of these stories, we are working hard to document, to preserve, to teach, because this is American history, right?
Right. That's right.
This is American history. This isn't just African American history. This is American history.
Preach.
New Orleans Public Library. Thank you. Thank you again. I appreciate that. Absolutely. I met, and I want to lift up some of the elders that have come before me. I said John Blassingame, Leon Waters with his Hidden History tours. I mean, he's done incredible research on the 1811 slave revolt. Dr. Ibrahim Seck, Dr. Jessica Harris, Tony Tipton Martin. I mean, it just goes on. Dr. Marcus Christian, who was a Dillard University professor. I mean, he did all this work way before me, so it's passing the torch and continuing to do the work. Mm-hmm.
Amen. No, so I wanted to make that point because I think that there's something about the buy-in, the commitment that we need folks to have to support, and sort of not just not the ephemera of the HBCU, but the honest, tangible resource that is right here in plain sight and withering with lack of support. And we see all these endowments and all these organizations who are seeing this. You see, it's a very particular trend over the last year. A lot of HBCUs are getting a lot of big funding opportunities that folks are seeing. And I think that we need to be paying attention to why these, massive grants are being given and why we aren't the ones also supporting and being in community. Maybe it means archivists going and donating their time to be able to, I mean, we see archives literally having to be thrown in the garbage because of
Yes,
mold, and I think that there's just this way in which we should be more protective and more sort of attuned to stewardship of these, I mean, just priceless, priceless archives.
absolutely. And I can't tell you, as just personally, now I'm in 21st century and I'm able to go to Tuskegee's archives and
Mhm.
look up all the documents from my great grandfather who I never met, and it's there. That is so profound to me, to actually see his handwriting, to
Mhm.
see the letters he sent back and forth between Robert Russell Moulton and all of these people, George Washington Carver. I mean, my grandmother sat on George Washington Carver's lap. It's very real to me.
Right. That's right. I want to put a pin in Tuskegee because I want to circle back to New Orleans a little bit. New Orleans is, and we've had this conversation before, and I don't know if you want to go here or not because I want to be respectful of time and move us along. But we have had many conversations about New Orleans and the sort of national global fascination with New Orleans. And what people misunderstand about New Orleans, the ways in which we disregard and maybe disrespect in some ways, the alchemy of experiences and like the it is a particular place that really deserves more context and more care with how we engage it. And I think as a site for some examples of women like Nellie Murray, who you've done extensive research on, but you bring up street vendors and just these ways in which we see culinary life. Again, back to the idea of New Orleans and its preservation historically, but the way that New Orleans gives us a clear kind of sort of microcosm of what the rest of the country would have been like. But it is a very particular place. And I would love if you just talk a little bit about why we're so fascinated by New Orleans, what people should think and know about it, and who we should be thinking about, who are our icons that we maybe don't lift up enough that you wish we would sort of be more curious about.
Well, there would be no United States if there wasn't a Louisiana Purchase, right? Dr. Kira Olish, the executive director of Hbcus Research Center, always says that when we have conversations, and it's very real. And this was a port city. It was a major port city. And so enslaved people, goods, products, bananas, rum, you name it, it came through this port, right? And so a culture developed that also created a Southern culture that spread not only to throughout the South, where everybody wanted to live like they were in Versailles, but it also spread to New York, Florida. Everybody wanted to dine like they were in New Orleans, but that also came off of enslaved labor that came from severe oppression and discrimination and the one of the worst kinds of slavery. When you look at some of the old movies from the night, I'm a huge film buff and I'm always using film and visuals with my students. And even in American literature, when you talk about downriver, right? Downriver was Louisiana. Nobody wanted to come to Louisiana. The sugarcane fields, it was brutal. Your life expectancy was, if you're lucky, 3 to 6 months, And so I think, a lot of times New Orleans is not included in the rest of American history, is looked at as different because of, our legacy of Creole culture, our legacy of Cajun culture, that we spoke French, that we spoke Spanish, and it's always been that way, right? When you look at Governor Claiborne and, the first American governor, or the one to rule Louisiana, basically under the American colonial period, it was always this pushback between Creoles. And when I say Creoles, Creole is a culture. It's not just it's not a race, right? So there were white Creoles, there were Black Creoles, there were mixed race Creoles, there were indigenous Creoles. Everyone was Creole before they became American, if you were lived here before 1803, right? So, it's always been a tug and pull to hold on to this culture here in New Orleans. And really, I'm not even going to put New Orleans, Louisiana,
Yes.
especially Creole country, right? Opelousas, Lafayette, Lake Charles, all of these cities that were, just a mecca of culture, but also a very hard life, and that doesn't take away from anyone else, but the sugar industry and the sugarcane industry was
It's a
very
different
real in
thing.
Louisiana. It's a different thing. And the climate,
Yes.
the
It's similar. I think it's similar to when we think about like rice plantations on the sort of on the Gullah Peninsula. It's like this way in which like you talk about cotton, talk about tobacco, all the other, but rice and and sugarcane. This is particular.
and the myth that, oh, the French and the Spanish treated people better, enslaved people better. That's not accurate. I mean, I encourage everyone to read the WPA slave narratives, to really do the research and read up on Louisiana's history. It's intense, and there's so many historians here that aren't able to get the major book deals or the speaking engagements, who have done the research, and then they publish and put out the work independently, and then someone comes along and takes that research, right? So I think we should lift up more New Orleans historians, and that goes across the board: Black, white, indigenous, Latinx, whoever from Louisiana, because they've been doing the work for a long time.
And doing it intersectionally. I think that's another thing that's
Actually,
so
absolutely.
like, yeah. Yeah, I love that. I would love if you can maybe talk a little bit about particularly Nellie Murray, but I think there's something really I remember, I don't know, this is in terms of context. I met Zella we've known each other since 2014. I remember getting an email from you when the first food conference you were planning. And I was like, who is this woman and what is this project? I need to, like, I heard about it through Dr. Harris, but it was tangential. And you were sort of breathing new life into this project. And it was this sense of, like you said, this marriage of food, but also context and history that was going to be so important. And I think that it's borne such beautiful fruit since then. But the thing that I think has been such an important factor, a sort of element of the Ray Charles program, has been the archive and the sort of digital projects you produced. Nellie Murray in particular, the dinner you did that celebrated her life, and just the derivative documentaries and also just content that has come from that research. It's sort of it brought her back to life in a way that I think is a perfect practice for other people in areas where they have these really visceral, well-documented sort of figures. Because I think that the more we know about Nellie Murray, I've been on a hunt for a Northup information for a long time, but just the ways in which we can sort of use the practice you sort of develop to sort of be more diligent about the Nellie Murrays in our own areas, I think is next level. So I would love to just talk a little bit about the research process around finding her life and work, and sort of just embodying her, because you've done it so beautifully.
Man, Nellie Murray, Madame Trevine, Barbara Trevine, if you live in
Yes, please
or
take a
you met
moment.
her, she's just such an incredible scholar. And, I remember meeting her years ago in the archives. And, she just really helped to mentor me, as a young professional and on my way. And Nellie Murray was the most sought after Creole caterer in New Orleans, in Louisiana, during the 19th century. Just for those who you all don't know, I'll just give you a brief history of her and why she's so important. And I lift up her name as much as I possibly can. Um, you know, she's been kind of a mention, David Shields, I remember he sent out a document, Professor David Shields sent out a document just listing some of the important figures in food in New Orleans and Louisiana, but Nellie stood out for me. And she was third generation enslaved plantation cook for Louisiana Governor Paul Octave Hebert. And she was freed by de facto after, the Civil War. And so it kind of goes back into John Blassingame's book, where you had this flood of, folks who were from the plantation coming to New Orleans, and, looking for work, trying to figure out, how am I going to feed myself? How am I going to survive? And Nellie was one of them, but she had a little bit of an advantage because she was serving enslaved, but she was serving the governor's mansion at one time. She grew up learning all of these recipes and all of these things. And she had something clicked on in her brain and said, I'm going to make money off of this, and I'm going to make big money. Right. And so, after the Civil War, and, I sit on the board at Herman Grima, these families, who's had some money left over, those who weren't destitute, who supported the Confederacy, they were able that now they had to pay, Black folks to cook. And they still needed to keep up with society, with Creole culture. It was still a lifestyle. And they wanted Creole cooks specifically because they spoke the language, they knew how to cook the food. And so it was important to them to keep up with that. And Nellie, because she served at the governor's mansion, she was able to create this persona, this aristocrat persona.
Mm-hmm.
And in 1894, the Daily Picayune, which is the New Orleans Times Picayune, put out that this Black woman, was traveling to Berlin, Paris. It was a whole spread on her. This is 1894, and her opinion on European cooking. And if you don't know Nellie Murray, you don't know anybody. And not only she lived on, what street did she live on? It's on the tip of my tongue, but she lived in uptown New Orleans with her modiste, which was her dressmaker, but also her roommate. Right. And so, but then you also look at the generational wealth and the legacy, whether it passed down or not, but it's the mindset had set down. And so today, we have Alden McDonald, who was a direct relative, and he owns Liberty Bank. You know what I mean? One of the largest Black owned banks in New Orleans. And she, put her nieces and nephews through, the early Dillard University. And she was able to fund so many projects. And even just, she became the chef de cuisine for the Chicago World's Fair. And she was the chef de cuisine and brought Creole cuisine to the world. That same fair, Nancy Green, the face of Aunt Jemima, was at that same fair. And both of them were formerly enslaved, right? And, we're also, and it says that Nellie Murray had swarthy, dark skin in the article, right? But it was something about Nellie that, she was able, and, and it's sad that, Nellie was one of the only ones who was able to make, a way for herself. But we have many women in New Orleans who were able to make the way. And it's not just in New Orleans, there were other places as well,
Yeah.
But, I'm speaking specifically to Nellie. and she died with a fortune. I mean, they, in her obituary, they talked about how she had amassed a fortune and she had a long list. I mean, she cooked for Susan B. Anthony, she cooked for the suffrage convention for Susan B. Anthony. She made 1,050 sandwiches for, soldiers at the levee before they went off to the Spanish American Civil War in Cuba, right? So it's so much that she did, and I just wanted to lift up her voice, and I'm so honored that I was able to, curate a dinner about her when Miss Leah was alive. We were able
It
to
was
raise money, and you were there, and
it
I
was
really
gorgeous.
appreciate that. And it was a profound moment in my life, and I'll never forget. And then just having Duke, Miss Leah's grandson, who makes some of those Lost Creole recipes. Chef BJ Dennis and his okra.
Mhm.
That okra was divine. And
Yeah,
then Miss Linda Green, the Yakami lady, that creamed
that's right.
oyster gumbo. I will never forget that creamed oyster gumbo. It was insane. So, I lift up Nellie Murray as much as I possibly can. I'm working on, some more research to put out, and, a book eventually. Well, not eventually, but soon. So I'm grateful to tell her story and just to call on her name and her spirit, and whatever I do, and all the women that came before me in this city.
Mm, yes. Um, there's something you touched on that I want to sort of circle back to, and it's about the sort of divergency of experiences enslaved cooks would have had. I think it's so interesting you talk about sort of Nellie being able to sort of see a kind of possibility that maybe other cooks weren't able to or didn't have the sort of savvy to be able to navigate the same way she did. But I think that there's something important about the way you talk about enslaved life, the way lots of important scholars talk about enslaved life, because we forget that it was regional and it was particular to the era we're talking about, and also just sort of plantation to plantation, even in the same region, the experience would have been different. But there feels to me to be this way in which food became opportunity for mobility or um, possibility, even in this contradiction, in this like brutality and the challenging nature of it. Like we sort of have to put into, you have to kind of cognitively sort of separate a lot of the truth of the experience to sort of parse out how a Nellie Murray would have been possible, how, just how folks would have been able to navigate. As I wonder if you could just sort of talk a little bit about what you wish people would dismantle in terms of their thinking around the enslaved cook and the life of the enslaved cook.
It's I it keeps me up late at night, because I think about my great grandmother, Alice Palmer. She was an enslaved cook. I didn't find, she wasn't a Nellie Murray. She was
Mm-hmm.
enslaved here in New Orleans, right? Um, what could it possibly have been? The exposure that Nellie had, but there were plenty of enslaved cooks who worked in, were
Higher profile, yeah.
right, and for elite families. So I, try to understand, what happened, and I constantly, like I said, I'm reading the narratives to try to understand and decipher, I just the language behind it, because there's certain things that the interviewees were not able to share with, depending
Mm-hmm.
on who interviewed them, right?
Yes.
um and it's fascinating me, because I also look at, the narratives, not only through the lens of, African Americans who were enslaved, but also indigenous people. That is, I think that we haven't done enough on that. I know there's a book out now about indigenous people who were also enslaved, but it's also that history right there, right? So it really depended on, I mean, when you look at Rose Nicole, how was there Rose Nicole who was able to buy her freedom and was able to buy 3 vendor stalls? It really depended on the person, and then you fast forward to Alina Richards, and during the Jim Crow South, and how she
Yep.
was able to become this, beyond Martha Stewart or, any of that time. And, if she would have lived, God knows what the culinary world would look like today.
I want to side note. This is I'm so glad you brought up Lena Richards, because I'm fascinated by her life and the fact that those tapes didn't survive. And I wonder, it goes back to a question I asked you earlier, but it really sort of goes back to what our responsibility is in a modern context to archiving the present, or what we place value in. Because I think about someone like Alina Richard, right? You think about the history making that her television program would have sort of represented. Her book publishing story being really particularly emblematic of the era that she existed in, but that nobody saw the value in the recordings of her show, that we sort of look at. I mean, just something about, did it get destroyed, or what? Like, what was it?
No. Well, this was during a time when American television was live, so they didn't even have the technology to record, right?
Okay.
So we wouldn't even been able to. There was nothing, no one knew how to record until a little bit later. So all we have is just a still image of her standing next to her daughter for WDSU and filming that. But I mean, if she would have lived a little bit longer, and the technology was available, we would have that archive, but we don't.
But I mean, I guess I guess I didn't think about that part. Because when you read sort of the stories about her life, they make a point of talking about how there just isn't any record of her program. But I guess I think about it relative to even relatively modern television history. Think about Verme on PBS. Think about there's so many. I don't think we are taking archives seriously in this modern moment, and I wonder. I don't know what's going to be the wake up call.
My kids are always laughing at me and like, Ma, you always taking pictures and always, putting stuff up. I do it because, you want to make sure that you put it out there. At least, if you put it online or out there, then, it's a living archive, right? And sometimes we don't have the resources to, or the relationships with our local library or a museum, to create a family box, so we can put everything inside. And my mother did that. She made sure that she, got with the library and put everything in the box. So, one day I'll be able to write my family story, right? We have to do that. And I make, for our introduction to food studies course that I teach, our midterm project, I always have students talk to the eldest member and their family, film it. You're to sit down, you to ask questions, and you are going to film it. And one of them I'm so proud of, and it's actually under our channel. One of our previous students from last semester, her grandmother talked about living in Oklahoma and what it was like to be an African American in the West and growing up on a farm there, and it's mind-blowing to them, right? And I think that we have to, and this goes for everyone, we don't have to wait for a WPA situation, federal government to say, okay, now it's time to sit down and talk to people, right? We have this phone.
StoryCorps exists right now. You can literally teach you how to archive it, teaches you how to tag your posts. Available. It gets a Library of Congress number.
Yes, the technology that we have and the access to information that we have right now is so powerful, and it's literally changing the food industry. I think the faces at what stories are being told. It's such an act. My dad, before he died, he used to say, we're in an axial age of information. And I do believe that, because we in real time, in like 2 seconds, we can connect with somebody from across the ocean immediately, easily, without having to get a phone card, pay $20, call somebody up. We all have this access to technology. So it is a profound moment in human history.
Yes, yes. So I think we're doing good on time. we have until 8:30. What's up? Was it? I'm sorry.
7:30.
7:30. I would love, because I want to leave room for questions. If you are as inspired by all of this information that Zella is sharing with us, please start to think about questions either in the chat or Q&A. But I guess I want to talk a little bit about Dillard in the Ray Charles program. Sure. You are charged with a very weighty and just profound edict. I think that the work that you're doing is changing the way so many organizations are thinking about our foodways. And I just would love if you just lift up the program and lift up just the work you're doing, because it's so multifaceted and there's so many areas that that your program sort of occupies. So just talk a little bit about Dillard.
Oh, thank you. So, Dillard University, we celebrated our 150th anniversary in 2019. So I was really, it's been kind of full circle, and just being one of the everyone on campus just really pushing Dillard's brand, Dillard's history, its legacy, the alums that we have. We're really passionate about Dillard, and just its legacy. And we just want the world to know about this incredible institution. And so, I look at, which is why, I wrote the book Recipes and Remembrances of Fair Dillard. I wanted to make sure that it was part of our curriculum so that students would learn about Dillard's history, that yes, they learn it when they become freshmen, their first year, and they learn about it, and they learn it each year, and, they have to learn the alma mater, etc. But I wanted them to learn about Dillard's history also through food. And the book was set up in 3 sections over 3 different presidents. The first one was President Albert Dent, who was a Morehouse graduate. His wife was a classic pianist who graduated from Juilliard. And today we have a street, we named a street Dr. Norman Francis, an incredible president of Xavier University. But we can't forget President Dent as well. There would be no Norman Francis if it wasn't for Dr. Norman Francis, if it wasn't also for President Dent. And he gave his life to Dillard. I mean, literally, the man built the only Black-owned hospital in New Orleans, Flint Goodrich Hospital. We have the oldest nursing program in the country, right? At a HBCU, and in Louisiana. And so, all of these stories it was mind-blowing to me, and just learning this. I'm not a Dillard alum, but hearing from other alums of who walked and came on this campus. I mean, we had Emperor Haile Selassie, the Ethiopian emperor, come to Dillard University to speak to 3,000 people, both Black and white, and they had to remove the colored only signs, on his path, and that they had to have an integrated ball during segregation because he was, a diplomat, an international diplomat. And, and then reading about, how he was excited to listen to jazz and eat shrimp and, and fried chicken and, and then the city of New Orleans gave him a Cafe Brûlot, Cafe Brûlot set as a gift. And now that is a lost dish, and you can only go to certain restaurants to get that experience, And then I was able to sit down with Miss Leah Chase. That was the last interview, one of the last interviews she did. And, I sat down and asked her about it. She saw all of that. And if you read the foreword in the book, that is one of the most profound interviews where she talks about standing on Canal Street. She got all her kids dressed up to see the emperor, the descendant of, of Jesus Christ, of, Queen of Sheba, King Solomon, right? Stand there with her children. And she said, at that moment, she said, no one knew who he was. My people didn't know who he was. And she said, I knew that I had to send my children so they can become educated and learn about their own history, right? And so those stories, and that the people that were already at Dillard, I just wanted to tell it again in 21st century, and then just to have these recipes. I mean, Mrs. Dent, this is during a time when there was no financial aid. There were barely any scholarships, and they were still making it very exclusive where not everybody could come, right? And they wanted to make sure they had the creme de la creme and you took college seriously. And she created this cookbook with the Dillard Women's Club in the 1950s. And she had all the famous celebrities submit a recipe. She had Marian Anderson, Eleanor Roosevelt, her huckleberry dessert, the first lady of the United States. She had the Israeli embassy give a recipe. You know what I'm saying? So she had all of these people that come on campus and these professors, from all over the world. We had German professors, Swedish professors, Turkish, all these people who worked on campus, and they all contributed a recipe. And then fast forward, we had Dr. Samuel Cook, who was very passionate also about liberal arts. And, we have a building named after him. And we had an international food festival during his time. And they produced a cookbook, and that was also to raise money for scholarships as the previous one, and I forgot to mention that previous Marian Anderson, Leontine Price, Ralph Bunche, Howard Thurman. I mean, these are powerhouses of that time, and Frida the Knight, the first food editor for Ebony magazine. Her recipe is in that book. Crazy. So I wanted to make sure also that I would preserve today under Dr. Walter Kimbrough's, because Dr. Kimbrough did amazing thing. He turned it around after Katrina. And so I wanted to make sure that we preserve that. And, Mrs. Kimbrough, who talked about being a professional woman and not knowing how to cook when she became a young mother, right? And she had to learn all of these recipes, and she shared some of her recipes. And she's the one who started the pre-law program at Dillard University. And our students are about to go to the mock trial championships. I mean, pre-law, we're creating lawyers, that's insane to me, So I wanted to make sure that we told Dillard's culinary history in the city of New Orleans, where Black hospitality and Creole culture is pivotal to this city and American history, and so I did that through that book. And I want in the legacy of what Mrs. Dent did, and Mrs. Cook, Miss Sylvia Cook, we also have Andrew Young's mother. She gave a recipe in there, but I wanted to make sure that all proceeds go back to Dillard University as they did before. So when you buy a book, it goes right back to Dillard, so
that's right. So,
yeah.
Copy immediately. I would love for you to talk about the Ray Charles program.
Sure.
I think that it's such a beautiful and particular kind of way that you're able to sort of house this research.
Absolutely. So, Ray Charles, what a legend. This is his program. This is his vision. I'm just, a vessel that's continuing to carry with his legacy, as well as the Ray Charles Foundation. And Dillard, and this was his brainchild. We always have this interesting conversation. Our VP of Institutional Development, Mark Barnes, he talks about when Ray Charles came to Dillard in 2003. And they were in a rush. He was going to receive an honorary degree. And he said, Mr. Charles, do you want to stop at McDonald's or, some Wendy's, wherever, so we got to get something to fast. And he said, I didn't come to New Orleans to eat no McDonald's. But then that's when the conversation started about this fast food generation. We're talking about Ray Charles, whose mother was a sharecropper, whose grandmother was a sharecropper, and he was eating on the chicken circuit and eating this down home cooking. So he wanted to make sure that, the culture, African American material culture, right, was preserved, passed down, taught in the classroom, because there's value in it, right? It is American culture. It has gone global. It's gone internationally. I mean, we see that even just with music, with hip hop, blues, etc. His music, and so the conversation began, and the administrators at Dillard said, we need to not just make this about food, but material culture as well. So, we are passionate about not only food, but material culture. We've done, work. We've had artists in residences. We did a whole thing on the history of Tignons, and we had an artist from London come and stay for a summer. And she was her, Tignon exhibit went worldwide. And then, we've had a conference where we invited the second line clubs to come and, talk about their history. The New Orleans Black Masking Indians, the Mardi Gras Indians, it's so much that we've done. And then finally, we're excited because now I have a program assistant. So, I don't have to be 20 of me, and,
That's
everybody else, on campus also, is involved and, excited about this. We have so many professors, incredible professors that have signed up to, teach a food studies course. We have food and media, food and literature, psychology of food, Dr. Eartha Johnson, John Polt, just incredible. Dr. Cheryl Atkinson, who also owns Boswell's Jamaican restaurant and is from Jamaica, So we have all of these incredible, professors and supporters who are doing so much to make sure that this, program grows and grows and grows. And we teach our students that, yes, African American material culture has value, and there are careers that you can create, and you can actually, create generational wealth. You can actually work for yourself, or you can consult for people. You can become a storyteller. And there's ways in it, marketing, advertising, whatever,
Mm.
Film.
That's right. I mean, the ways in which you've been able to pull in resources from Dillard students and alumni to create the digital projects you have. I mean, just so beautifully shot and so thoughtful. And it's also just this way in which you can see these young people investing and telling their stories. This is so dope to watch. I would love if you could maybe, again, I want to make sure we leave room in case we have questions, but this project, this lecture series is part of, is such a beautiful kind of, it feels like a sort of manifestation of all of the storytelling you've been doing since your tenure started in the Ray Charles program. And I would love if you could talk about, if you could tease out a little bit of what's to come, because I think if you all are not subscribed already, please go subscribe to the Dillard University, the Ray Charles program's Dillard YouTube page, because it's such a just treasure trove of clips and interviews, and all the past lectures in this series are there. But just what's to come, because I think that you've been doing getting such amazing people on board to share their stories and share their research and expertise. But just give people a little taste of what's to come.
Well, for the Legacies of American Slavery project, we have a conference coming up soon. We will give information that'll be held at Yale University. It will be virtual. So we're excited about that. They're in the process of planning, and there's other, universities that are also participating in this. And I sent the link earlier. You can see what other universities won the grant. And then we also have CIC partners that are part of the cohort who are participating as well. Then we have for the Ray Charles program, Gabrielle E.W. Carter is coming to New Orleans for a cooking demo. And if you know about her, she was on High on the Hog on Netflix. So we're excited to have her, and just share, and just to be able to be around her, and just, this meal that she's going to prepare for our students and the public. We're so excited for that, and to learn more about, just what it was like to be on a Netflix show, and, where our students should head next. Then we also have some more films coming out with our students. I have another student that's actually working on a project that's going to come out hopefully next year. Shout out to Autumn. And we just are continuing to move ahead. I'm working on a book that is taking up most of my time as well. And just really pushing our food studies, minor full steam ahead, recruiting, enrolling students, trying to grow this program and just make it sustainable and solidify. And we have, I can't say some of the things that we have planned, but I know
No.
that when it comes out, listen, it's a game changer. It's a game changer. So I'm excited for the future of what we're doing. And, we just continue to do the work. That's all, and it's all about our students. It's all about our students, our community, and, just following in the footsteps of those who came before us.
Yeah, I just want to get people excited. You should just keep sign up for newsletters, subscribe, get your life together to be ready for when all this amazing content drops. We have a really interesting question. Thank you from Robin Harper. He says, I love this conversation. You're both incredible. I'm excited about the future when the scholars are talking about, thank you. He's on that. It seems that interest in culinary arts and hospitality seems to be fading among younger generations. I don't know if you find this to be true in your experiences, but could you share some practices that you find to be helpful in engaging our youth in culinary arts and hospitality? It's an interesting question. I don't know if you want to take it. I definitely have opinions about this.
Well, I want to hear your opinion since you're the chef, and I'll give my feedback on just what I see.
I wonder in what context you think the interest in culinary arts is fading, because I actually see an uptick. I think so my site is about 13 years old, and I would say 50 to 60% of the emails I get are from young people who are watching television and seeing more Black representation, or just seeing the sort of ephemera around the culinary arts as desirable. And what I've sort of come up against is more trying to put into proper context what this work is really about, because it's not what you see on TV, right? I think engaging young people is really more about, I think the best practice for young people is to really sort of deputize them to start to be more curious. The moment you read A Vertimen Grows, and the moment you get a book like Diller, a potential Diller student who gets to read Remember, like the Remembrances cookbook, to be able to see that they are sort of in community with an unbroken chain of legacy, that immediately straightens your spine. It changes the engagement you have, the posture you take with the work you're about to give yourself over to. I think just sort of changing the tone of that relationship, and not sort of, certainly you want young people to be fired up and excited, and sort of you want to make it attractive. But I think some sobriety in sort of grounding them in how deep their roots goes a long way to making folks who are gonna stay in this work long term and actually have them to contribute.
I agree. I think about one of my students. He's a Dillard alum now, Jameer Morris from Chicago. We have students who come from all different backgrounds, not necessarily Jameer, but we come from, we have students who, first, now 2 decades, their only, access to food is the corner store.
Mm.
eating, hot flaming chips and, juice, high fructose juices and things of that nature. And I can remember I was, some of the students from Chicago said, "Oh, Miss Palmer, you from Chicago? Can you be our advisor for our Chicago club?" And it broke my heart, because some of them said, "We're going to show everybody in New Orleans, that we got, good food and then da 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 da, and some of the things that they said, some of their food memories were all snacks,
Mm-hmm.
and snacks that aren't healthy, you know. And so, but that is the reality. And I think for Ray Charles to see that back then, before the Food
Yep.
Network, before any of this,
That's right.
it was still it still was a stigma and a stereotype, and it was looked down upon if you were a person of color who was a cook, or a chef, because they, or a farmer, a Black farmer,
That's right.
um I, just know that this is, this career, this industry is growing. These storytellers are growing, and I want us to never forget who came before us. Like you said, Verda McGrosner, Dr. Jessica Harris, Tony Tipton Martin, because they were putting the pieces together when it wasn't popular.
That's
You
right.
know, now we have High on the Hog, and we're reclaiming it again. And I think it's also, a lot of just across the board. I see Indigenous farmer Sean Sherman, when I
Yes.
see, some, just main, just people doing the work, and, the Ashton Berry, all of these
Mm-hmm.
incredible people doing incredible work. Even La Cocina, what
Yes.
they're doing, in San Francisco.
Yep.
I do, and this is where I say that we're at an axial age where people want to grow their own food, where people are conscious of where their food comes, or conscious of, what they're putting in their bodies, and conscious of policy, and how it determines on what we're able to get access to, and I mean, when you look at even just from where we are now, you know, um, there was a time when all Americans were, and even just looking at the recipes and remembrances, I mean, it's a whole lot of aspic in there, you know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? And
Mm-hmm.
so, Jello molds were the thing, right? And, women were also succumbed to, and our own communities, were succumbed to the canned foods, the, frozen dinners, and making things comfortable and easier so that, you can work in the workforce, and all of the dynamics of the social hierarchy of a woman's place or a man's place, right? And I think I'm so fascinated when I hear young people talk about all of these indigenous and food items that we're bringing back. And when I look at like Jameer Morris, like I said before, who's a Dillard alum from Chicago, he said, "Miss Palmer, I want, he would come to every event, every cooking demo, everything." And I called an old friend of mine, Chef Adolfo Garcia, who is a, prominent Latinx, chef and restaurateur here in New Orleans. And he said, "Zella, the boy is slow and he can't cook." I said, "Just give him time. He's passionate about it." Jameer opened up a bar and a restaurant in Little Rock, Arkansas a year ago. So you
Look at
don't
that.
know,
What seeds are being planted?
and he has a little catering company, and I know he is so determined. He's going to keep on trying and getting better and better and better until he gets, and he's getting married, expecting a baby, so you, gives kids time, because this also, they're learning what our grandparents also were ashamed to share,
Mm-hmm.
you know
That's,
but also, that we thought, oh, you can't make money as a farmer, or you can't make money as a cook, you need to, you know do this. But now, it's a whole different ball game with technology, and those who weren't getting the publishing deals, those who weren't getting the cable network cooking shows, they're creating their own cooking shows on Instagram, on
that's
TikTok,
right.
you
That's
know
right.
so it's a different time. It's a different time.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think this you have a comment, a young woman who says she's also located in Chicago and from North Carolina, doing her thesis on sort of the stigma around our foodways and how our communities eat and what the misinformation is about. But I think this, yeah, such a really important time to be thinking about culture and thinking about our foodways as to the language of Ray Charles, material culture that we sort of see. The point you made really early on in this conversation that is sitting with me still is like that our foodways are a site for serious cultural inquiry. And it is absolutely about the joyfulness of food, but it's also a very serious discipline that is growing before our eyes.
Yes.
And the work we do is all informing how that's going to look going forward.
I mean, you could get a PhD at NYU in food studies now. You can go to, abroad, and I mean, it's changing, and we had a student from NYU who was a master's student who enrolled in one of our courses, because we were trying to figure out, how do we launch online courses, which we're hoping to do, in the near future, because we have to diversify, how we teach, right?
That's right.
But it is, I mean, Boston University, NYU, Nicholls State, I mean, Spelman, Dillard, it's growing,
Yep.
Loyola here in New Orleans. I mean, there's a lot of programs out there that understand that food is integrated curriculum, that like I was telling you earlier, I taught a whole lesson about, just Louisiana Creole foodways. And next week, we're going to make pralines in my class. I mean, how will that food just really tie in the stories and the facts, so it's coming alive when you actually have to put in that work, stir in that pot, you know what I mean?
That's right.
And then you was like, oh, and then, and then you walk around New Orleans and you still see praline vendors, but then also real time, the pushback against pop-up vendors in New Orleans, and the recent, controversy and news about that. And, the legacy of that, and who gets to police and say who does what, when in a certain time, some of the wealthiest, enslaved owners or planters made a killing off of sending street food vendors to the streets to sell for them. That was extra extra revenue for them, right? So and now that it's independent, it's complicated. And I can also remember someone who was recently released from Angola and would told me, Zella, and sometimes our space has been, trauma centers, and not meaning to, but, we have grown men sometimes and grown women, come to us needing help and trying to understand, like, how do I navigate these policies, these systems? And, he had just been released from Angola prison. And how do we reduce recidivism if I can't sell food in the streets? And I'm getting constantly ticketed and harassed, and I have all my paperwork, so
here too. I'm in Harlem, the Bronx, where Black and Brown communities are trying to stand their ground. It's like, how do you also the realities of sort of cottage food industries that are 100% the backbone of these communities? How do you navigate that? How do you navigate in a way that keeps you safe, but also respects the heritage and tradition that's right there? We have a question that's sort of about, I want to make sure I get her name probably right, but Chesha Hodge. She said she's a registered dietitian. She's wondering about how the sort of celebratory foods get juxtaposed with a real need for honest conversations about care and health and wellness. I think it's a fair conversation to have. I think, part of that question, I think, presupposes that we are honest about the truth of our foodways, right? Like, if we only talk about the celebratory foods, if we only talk about the sort of high caloric, then one, we being dishonest, we being historic in terms of honesty of our foodways themselves, but we also aren't really telling a complete history, a complete story. And so I think when we start to get more honest, we see a more full and sort of rich culinary story. But what do you think,
Absolutely.
Zella?
And it's such, listen, you know, when we interviewed Miss Leah Chase, my students and I, for the story of New Orleans Creole cooking the Black Hand in the Pot, we watch it later. She talked about, she said, we didn't eat macaroni and cheese and those celebratory foods every day. We ate that only on Sunday. We were eating soup and vegetables. We couldn't afford meat like that. So when you talk to the elders, there was a high vegetable diet, you know. It wasn't where you were eating meat every day, right? And we were also not eating processed food like that.
That part, I think that's the hugest part of this story. I mean, so much of what you're talking about in terms of the way that our food gets distilled into sort of a soulful narrative or just a celebratory food narrative is so much about trying to make plays out of context. Like what happens with all immigrant cuisines, right? All people who have to leave places where they had, I mean, my grandparents grew up on a street where, somebody had the tomatoes, somebody had the collard greens,
Exactly.
somebody, and you leave that to go to high population cities where nobody's growing anything, and you have to figure out how to use processed food. But also, what if you don't have a kitchen? And I think that we forget context, right? We forget that, people were trying to make the best out of making new plays, and that those experiences really are about that.
Absolutely. And I found footage in the documentary and it just blew my mind. And it's just, and I was telling my students, and just one generation or even just a decade, your food memory can be completely erased. And then all of a sudden, you don't remember that 10 years prior, or your auntie or your uncle or your grandparents were eating vegetables all the time. And I found footage of a second line in front of the projects in New Orleans, and the truck that was out there that was selling to the people and who were, the people who were participating in the second line, it was all vegetables and fruit. That's it. But then you also, and it's happening in every country, and it gets into what, this idea of, our food policies, how, we, just commercialize and create these laws and rules that says that, a local fisherman or a local farmer cannot sell and to the people. I mean, I see it all the time. I see, country folks from, Opelousas or wherever they are come and drive, even sometimes to near Gentilly and try to sell shrimp or try to sell, vegetables and produce, watermelon. And then somebody in their little, truck comes along with their, and stops them. And then that's pushing them away. So, the city doesn't get access to some of those, fruits and vegetables, which is a shame. And, we have to change, which is why this program for us is really important. We need more food policy makers. We have to, and I mean, we should learn from COVID. You know what I mean? It was some of the shelves were bare, and across the globe. And it is so important to know in your ecosystem, in your neighborhood, where your food is, and it shouldn't cost, $20, $30 for an organic apple. And, and it's become, this kind of, exclusive elitism that comes with having access to real food.
That's right.
So we also have we have a greenhouse that's on campus, and, we are excited to renovate it and grow our own food. I mean, and when I think about also, the HBCU president, Sorrell, who, turned the football field into a farm.
That's right.
So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's all there. I mean, we've done it. And when you ask, people and students, do you know about the land grant institutions? Do you know about the Morrill Acts? Most of them don't know that a lot of these land grant institutions, they once were agricultural hubs where people
That's right.
learned, and when you look at George Washington Carver, those cabbages, I mean, and I'm always trying to like tell students, like, this is bigger than just, George Washington Carver wasn't just the peanut man, how we just kind of diminish and water down American history. We don't just do that to people of color. They also, it's endemic of American history in general, and
That's right.
we're looking at, we're a young country, right? We're a young country in comparison to Europe, to Africa, to Asia, to other civilizations that have been around for so long, right? We have got to do better to tell history and to make sure that we just don't have, walking zombies who don't know anything happened, a month ago. You know what I mean?
Preach. Well,
Yeah.
Zella, I want to be respectful of time. We hit it almost perfectly.
Wonderful.
This has been so wonderful. It's always an honor to be in community with Dillard University, even virtually. I am just so grateful to have had another opportunity to watch your mind work, and to be part of this series in some way. So I just thank you for the opportunity, but thank you so much for just all you doing with Dillard. And please, folks, if you are, I don't know, I want to give Zella the last word, but if you are thinking about where your dollars go, please think of donating to this program. This is the work they're doing is literally going to change the way our foodways get taught and preserved, and just needs your support in material and non-material ways. So please think about being in the community with this program.
And I see so many amazing, comments. I wish we could answer all of them, but thank you all for just all of your, and Sanidra, I see you, you're doing incredible work. Congratulations on Black Women in Food. Detroit, North Carolina. I just love it. I'll be in North Carolina soon. So I love to go back also to my roots there and stay here in New Orleans where my roots are. We have roots all over, so I just appreciate everybody's support in this program. I sent you some links previously. We will follow up tomorrow, and this will be available on YouTube. Just thank you all for your support and everything that we're doing. And we will send out more information soon about the conference. The virtual conference is coming through Yale University, and just, keep in touch. And if you have to, want to email one of us, you can contact us. Our information is on Dillard University's website. And I want to also thank Chef Therese Nelson. You are such an incredible chef and just, an advocate for so many. And you are like me, you're always behind the scenes, but I just want to lift you up, sis, because you are incredible. And I'm excited to see what you would do. And I'm excited that we're also recording this. So this is a living archive. We were here today. So we continue to document and archive this moment in time. So thank you all for joining us. And we look forward to more conversations and more engagement with everyone. So thank you. Have a blessed and safe night.